wondering the whole night what my theme music was. So I don't want to begin on a negative note, but it's great the welcome that I've gotten. I'm a little bit concerned that I will have to explain to my mother that I got a little bit of a less robust round of applause than the washer and dryer. Which is going to very much confuse my Indian parents. I learned a few things just sitting here. I want to make an announcement here for the first time that I love my name, but I am totally changing my name to Preet Gogo. You have definitely recovered from the washer and dryer. Because that's the coolest name ever. For a while I'm sitting there thinking, is there like a secret drinking game going on? Every time Johnny Gogo's name gets mentioned, you have to have a drink. There'll be a bunch of drunk Asians in the room. So I'm thinking I'm going to keep with the Johnny Gogo, or the Preet Gogo idea, but then one of the other speakers suggested to me that maybe that would sound a little bit too much like an Indian massage parlor. So is there any press here at all? I was going to take that one step further, but I think it's really great to be here. I want to thank Kenneth for that great introduction. I want to thank the organization for all that it does, not just for prosecutors, but for the communities and the country everywhere that all of you serve. I want to congratulate the winner of the Prosecutor of the Year Award and the scholarship recipients. Mostly I want to thank everybody in the room who is a public servant. I think public service is one of the highest callings you can aspire to, and in particular I think being someone who is responsible for the enforcement of the rule of law is one of the highest forms of service in the civilian context. I say all the time, I get a lot of credit and I get a lot of these accolades that were mentioned in the introduction, but I don't do any of the work. It's the people in my office who do the work, and I've discovered over time, it's been almost 6 years now, that if you hire people smarter than you, better than you actually get a lot of awards. Recognized, and I know there are DAs here, and they're all great public servants, and it's been an honor to meet many of them. The people who do the work and the people who deserve the credit and the applause and the accolades are the line prosecutors and staff who actually do the cases. So I would like everyone to give a round of applause to them. There are too many people here to acknowledge, but just a couple quickly. Congressman Mike Honda, who's here, who's been a big supporter of the community for so long. California Supreme Court Justice Goodwin Liu, who I had the pleasure of honoring. There are a lot of folks, and I can't mention all of you, but thank you for coming and thanks for having me come and speak here tonight. So I'm in law enforcement and have been in law enforcement for the better part of my career, and I think that Asian Americans in law enforcement have come a long way. There are more prosecutors in law enforcement who are Asian American than there have ever been before. I think the turnout here is a testament to how much things have changed. I think if you had had a NAPIPA, when I was a line prosecutor 10, 15 years ago, there wouldn't have been a banquet, there would have been maybe a brunch. And I'm not sure Johnny Gogo would have come. That's true. The ranks of Asian American cops have, at least in my hometown of New York City, have increased by double. The number of Asian Americans in the FBI have increased also by double. But there's still, I think, more work to do. There's more diversity to be had in law enforcement everywhere. So people are getting more used to seeing Asian Americans as prosecutors, as agents, as cops. It wasn't too long ago, however, when that was not the case. I'll just tell you a quick personal story. So when I was in the office as a line prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, I'm Indian American, you may have guessed. I did a lot of cases with a gentleman June Kim was Korean American, who is now the chief of my criminal division in the office. But back then, we were doing cases together, and it was so unusual to a particular law enforcement agent who was at ICE, at the Department of Homeland Security, that he thought it was interesting that we were working on cases together, an Indian American and a Korean American, and he literally began to call us Harold and Kumar. I was Kumar. That's a true story. You can ask Johnny Gogo. So the obvious question, I think, at events like this, I have mixed feelings sometimes about the idea of talking about what it means to be in law enforcement, to be the head of an office as an Asian American as opposed to just an American. And I get the question from time to time, and have over the course of years, what does it mean to be the Asian American U.S. Attorney? Not just the U.S. Attorney, but the Asian American U.S. Attorney. What is the relevance of your background, the fact that you were an immigrant from India? And I don't always love that question. Part of the reason why is I don't always love the spirit in which the question is asked. I think that there are good reasons to ask it. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But there's a lot of silly stuff that gets written about the identity or gender or national background of prosecutors. There's so much, I think, unfortunately, misplaced emphasis on an accident or coincidence of ethnic overlap. I'll give you one example that's my personal favorite. In 2009, I had just become the U.S. Attorney in New York. And a few days after we arrested a gentleman by the name of Raj Rutna, who was also South Asian, along with a number of white people, I might add. Through insider trading, you're clapping for the arrest of white people. It began like this, quote, "It seems like a courtroom drama made for Bollywood." Yes. The Sri Lankan hedge fund kingpin, pursued by a fellow immigrant, the Indian-born U.S. Attorney for Manhattan, close quote. That's me, Kumar. Now imagine for a moment if they had run a story like that a year earlier. Quote, this is made up, it's part of the code. "It seems like a made-for-Broadway drama about the biggest Ponzi schemer in history, Bernard Madoff, who is Jewish, being pursued by a fellow Jew, U.S. Attorney Lev Dassin. It's like something out of Fiddler on the Roof." Can you imagine that story? How long would it be before that writer was no longer in the employ of the Wall Street Journal? So I'm a little bit taken aback from time to time at how much is made of certain coincidences and the identity of the prosecutor. And in my own case, since there have been a number of high-profile Indian Americans who've been prosecuted out of my office, before I got there and certainly after I leave, it's interesting to me that people will react with surprise. My goodness, there's a South Asian defendant and there's a South Asian prosecutor. Holy cow. Such a sharp crowd. I hope all of you win a washer and dryer. So there's a South Asian prosecutor and a South Asian defendant. Can you believe it? As a friend of mine once said, do you know where that happens every day? India! I was going to mention this, but it was mentioned in the introduction. There was once upon a time a case that my office brought that I didn't know anything about because I can't be intimately involved in every case because I'm busy, getting awards. The career prosecutor in my case brought a criminal action against a mid-level diplomat named Devani Kobagati in New York. And there was, I don't know how many of you followed that, parents certainly followed that. And there was a lot of discussion about whether she was guilty or not, which is fine, but there was also a lot of discussion about the motivations of the prosecutor. That's another example in which it turned out coincidentally to be the case that the prosecutor, the head of the office, but not the live prosecutor, was Indian American, and the defendant was Indian from India. And we arrested this person, and there were claims of diplomatic immunity, and those of you who read New York Times may have read that it basically caused an international incident, which is fine. Except there were a lot of discussions in the country of my birth, India, about why it is the case might have been brought. And it didn't occur to some people that the case was brought because it was a legitimate case based on the law and the facts. And career prosecutors and career State Department officials felt that a crime had been committed. Not the crime of the century, but a crime nonetheless. And among other things, people began to suggest that the case was brought because maybe I seem like this kind of a person. I was a self-loathing Indian who was just doing these things to aid my ability to prove myself to various people in white America. And in fact, a substantial news outlet in India reported, and this is when things start to get silly when you're a prosecutor, and the DAs here all know this, said, obviously Preet Bharara is doing this to prove himself to his white masters. Presumably Eric Holder and Barack Obama. We're doing so much better than the washer and dryer. I think I like all of it. So the point is, there can be an undue focus on ethnic or religious or racial difference, particularly when addressing issues relating to the rule of law, that risks, I think, if we're not careful, debasing the process and delegitimizing it. The law, as prosecutors know, is the law. And the facts are the facts, and none of this can affect the duties and responsibilities of any law enforcement official, except to make sure that everyone is treated equally in the eyes of the law. I think there is, after thinking about it for some years, some relevance to being Asian American or being an immigrant or being from a particular community, which should become obvious as I address today's theme. That's what I want to talk about. So I'm very pleased that this year's theme is the American dream, for a lot of reasons that are obvious. I will say, though, in some ways, and I apologize again for being mildly negative, in the eyes of many of our Asian forebears, none of us is quite living up to the American dream because none of us became doctors. You know what I'm talking about. In fact, if we were to poll many of the parents of people who became prosecutors, they might say that NAPIPA stands for Network of Asian Prosecutors instead of physicians. Alas. You were all wondering, how is he going to deal with the A? I'll say again what I said at the beginning, I think that the pinnacle of public service on the civilian side is to be a prosecutor, and you should always appreciate what a gift it is that you get to serve the public, whether in the United States or the state or the county in which you serve. So I think it's fitting for a moment to talk about the significance of the journey of being an outsider to being part of the American fabric, an essential part of which, in my view, is the American justice system. I'll tell you one quick story. I was reminded of the poignance of that immigrant journey in the form of a letter. I swear assistant U.S. attorneys in all the time, and a few years ago, I swore in a woman who was an immigrant, and her father wrote me a letter a couple weeks later, and I want to read a portion of it to you. And I think it helps you appreciate how important it is, the work that you do. He wrote, quote, "Dear Mr. Bharara, there are 3 occasions in our lives that have really stood out in reminding us of how proud we are to be Americans. The first occasion was when we became American citizens. The second occasion was standing at Mount Rushmore in front of our great presidents' heads and singing the American anthem. The third occasion was when you swore in our daughter as an assistant United States attorney. The ceremony was heart-wrenching and brought back the tears again of pride in America. I will never forget when you said to us that this is reaching the American dream. Close quote. I think that the specific examples of Asian American success in law and law enforcement continue to be inspiring, and each is a universal reminder of both the immigrant story and also the immigrant promise. One came not too long ago when Miranda Dew was confirmed as a district judge in Nevada. Born in war-torn Vietnam, Judge Dew left her country with her family when she was just 9 years old to find asylum in Malaysia, where her family spent a year in refugee camps before ultimately being granted refuge in the United States. Another reminder also came not too long ago when I actually had the honor of attending the investiture of Judge Denny Chin to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in New York. As many of you know, Judge Chin was born some 58 years earlier in Hong Kong and came to America when he was just 2. His father worked as a cook in a Chinese restaurant. His mother was a seamstress. And he got to swear an oath to become a judge on the second highest court in the land. Yet another reminder came also, I got to attend this personally, before I even became the U.S. Attorney, when I sat at the confirmation hearing of Judge Kiyo Matsumoto in Brooklyn. Judge Matsumoto, whose Japanese parents were put in internment camps during World War II, and whose family's faith in American justice must truly have been tried, was sworn in just a few years ago as a federal district court judge in Brooklyn. Her appointment, by the way, transcended history. And so there are many, many examples. They abound, especially here in California. Now, I had my own reminder of the transformative power of America recently. So I get invited to speak at a lot of things. And so this is the favorite speaking invitation I've ever gotten. But the second favorite. And there was no washer and dryer available at that one. It was not one that you might expect. It wasn't speaking at the commencement or talking to lawyers. It was a time that I got to speak at a naturalization ceremony for new citizens. It was last summer, in June of last year. And it took place at Federal Hall National Memorial. That's the location where George Washington himself was sworn in as the first president of the United States. They called me and said, "We'd like you to do this," because I'd asked if I could do it. I said, "Can I invite my parents?" Because my parents are naturalized citizens, as am I. And they said, "Sure." And they called me back and they said, "Not only do we want your parents to come, but we'd love it if your parents actually led the audience when it's over in the Pledge of Allegiance," which was great. Until my mom called and said she was very nervous, she would forget the words of the Pledge of Allegiance. So I had to print it out in like 40-point font. My dad and my mom came. He actually brought his original naturalization papers to show me and my kids when he came to the naturalization ceremony. And he was a reminder to me, like no other, of what America gave to me and my family and so many other people. And I think it's worth remembering from time to time, and this is as good a time as any. And as I told the new citizens that day, 37 years earlier, a young man and woman stood where they stood then at an identical ceremony in Freehold, New Jersey. And at the time, they had 2 young sons, one 8, the other 5. And those people, of course, were my mom and dad. They taught their sons to work hard and to study hard. They taught us to love our country, but also to respect our heritage. They explained that even while America was their home, India could remain in their heart. They put us through grade school and through college and through graduate programs. They bore their sacrifices quietly, but with pride, hoping things would turn out okay. And even though my mom and dad came here for the American dream, I think they never imagined just how sweet the dream's reality could actually be. Because you see, for my whole life, my Indian father was a studiously unemotional man. But in the months leading up to my confirmation, he sometimes seemed to become a bit overwhelmed at the prospect of his son becoming the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. But perhaps that was understandable for a man like my father, who was born 75 years ago, halfway across the globe, who grew up in a small village in Punjab, India, who lived for a time in a home without even basic plumbing, and who was the first member of his family ever to go to college. He brought our family to this part of the world some 45 years ago with only a few dollars in his pocket and a hope in his heart that we would have a better life in this country and that his children might one day amount to something in America. And so when you are an Indian immigrant, like me, who becomes a naturalized citizen, who later becomes chief counsel to a United States senator, and who later still is nominated by the first African-American president to become the first Asian-American U.S. attorney in America, you begin to believe that anything is possible in America. And then, when you watch your brother, this is a good story, quietly quit his job to start a small internet company with almost no capital and no customer base, when you see him put into practice the simple lessons of hard work and honest work taught by our immigrant parents, when you learn the news that he has grown the business so quickly and so successfully that Amazon has bought the company for the staggering sum of more than $500 million, that always gets a gasp. When your father came from nothing and you have everything, then you know that anything is possible in America. For my family, and for so many families, the phrase "only in America" will never be a cliche. In fact, I sometimes fear that I will not have enough breaths in my body to give back what I feel I owe my country. Because America is like no other place. I challenge you to name another country where on any given day, in any given city, foreigners from 31 homelands might be happily swearing an oath of allegiance to a country they were not born in. You can't do it because there is no such country. Only America welcomes every day populations of people like my mother and my father, people who ate biryani before they ate burgers, who learned cricket before they learned baseball, who felt only limits before they felt freedom. Only America announces as a fundamental principle your right to the pursuit of happiness. Now, how a kid like me, named Preet Bharara, who hails from Punjab, India, by way of New Jersey, could have the position that I had is almost beyond my humble powers to process. And yet here we are. And that says much more about America than it says about me. And I think part of the reason that this can be is that the United States has built a system of laws, even if flawed and frequently in need of repair, that enshrines the right to equal opportunity and embodies the sacred American idea that every child, even a poor or orphan or immigrant child, can rise higher than that child's parents could ever have imagined. Whether it become the first Asian American ever to serve as a federal judge, like Herbert Choi from the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, whether it become the first Asian American Attorney General in California history, like Kamala Harris, whether it become the first Asian American governor on the American mainland, like Gary Locke of Oregon. Those are phenomenal firsts, first-time things, and they take your breath away. Without a doubt, I think a first for any community can be deeply inspiring to members of that community who are still aspiring. And so I suppose that's one relevant aspect of having a certain ethnic background. A first-time achievement within a community is something like a mini moon landing. It signals something to young people who may not yet know that their dreams can become reality too, even though they might have a funny name, or an exotic heritage, or a misunderstood religion. I mean, after all, if Gary Locke can do it, maybe I can do it too. If Sonia Sotomayor can do it, maybe I can do it too. If Barack Obama can do it, maybe I can do it too. But even this heartwarming idea that I will contrast with is subject to limitation. Because ideally, one should be able to be inspired without regard to common ancestry or ethnicity, because common humanity trumps everything else. Consider this for a moment. He was an American named King who was inspired by an Indian named Gandhi, who had himself been inspired by an American named Thoreau, who had himself been inspired by an Indian text called the Bhagavad Gita. To my mind, that is a cycle of inspiration that transcends race and transcends religion and creed and color, and the mere fact of that cycle, to me, is deeply inspiring if you pause to think about it even for a moment. So we should take our inspiration wherever we can find it. And let me mention an additional place where I think we can find it, as I've already suggested. Profound inspiration should come not only from role models and famous firsts, but from the system of laws that we are sworn to uphold and enforce. Our system of laws is not perfect, and God knows there are imperfect practitioners within that system. But what the system aspires to do deserves respect and perhaps even awe. As the many prosecutors in this room appreciate perhaps better than anyone else, in this country, no one is above the law, no matter who you are, who you know, or how much money and power you possess. There are precious few countries, even in 2015, where that would not be a completely laughable statement. And certainly, not too many countries in our various homelands. In this country, the law not only equalizes, in this country where more languages and cultures and cuisines coexist than anywhere else, the law binds us together in ways that we too seldom appreciate. In a way, and over time, the law has become part of the essential social and cultural glue of America. Because here's the thing. Whatever name you give your God, whatever book you deem scripture, whatever rituals of religious faith you observe, whether you were Orthodox or Reformed, whether you were devout or lapsed, whether you pray or not, if you are an American, you are bound to every one of your fellows in the greatest country that has ever existed by a pious faith in the enduring principles of liberty and equality and the rule of law. That is the founding formula of our country, for our democracy, and for our prosperity. That is the reason that people of all faiths and all colors and all cultures come here. That is the reason that those same people invest here and build here and stay here. That's the reason so many of your families came. That's the reason my own family came. And it's the reason that I can be standing before you today. And so to end, let me just say, from time to time, I think about where my parents came from. I think about how far they came. And I think about how very much they overcame. And I think about the hopes they harbored for their young sons in a new and strange country, that they might amount to something in America. And I think there is still something called the American dream. And I have dreamt it, I have lived it, and I hope I never awaken from it. And every single one of you, by virtue of your success, and more importantly, by virtue of your service, is living it too. Thanks very much for having me.